Good morning, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are about to get started. I'll give it maybe 30 seconds for everyone to kind of filter in, and then we'll get going. All right, so thank you for joining us today for our TechConnect webinar. We are super excited to share some valuable knowledge with you around Microsoft Defender today. So we have our senior systems consultant, Jon Anderson, who is going to be presenting for us today. Feel free throughout the presentation to, if you have questions that come up, we have a Q&A box or the chat box that you can enter some of those questions in, and then we'll try and get those answered for you. And then we'll also have a few minutes at the end of the presentation for questions if they come up. And then just a quick note, after the webinar ends, I will send out the recording to everyone so you can have that to review if you would like. And that is all the notes we have to get started. So I will pass this over to Jon so he can tell you about Microsoft Defender.
Great. Thanks for the info, Jordan. I do see people are joining and they have to be admitted. So if you want to just keep an eye on the guest list and admit people as they come in.
Yep, got it.
Great. Okay. So yeah, let's get started with today's presentation. So welcome everyone to the Now Micro TechConnect. Today we're going to be talking about the Microsoft Defender Security Suite. So the agenda is pretty basic. We're going to go through kind of an overview of some of the Microsoft Defender security products, and then we're going to do a lot of demos. As Jordan mentioned, my name is Jon Anderson. I'm a senior systems consultant here at Now Micro. I've been doing the consulting thing for actually over 13 years now, with a focus on the Microsoft stack. So Intune, Configuration Manager, Azure, Defender, all those good things. The focus is on the securing identities and devices. And I've got my email in here as well. So if there's questions that don't get answered, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to chat. As I mentioned, I work for Now Micro. We're an IT solutions provider based out of the Twin Cities, and we've been around for over 30 years now. I think we'd be best described as a device lifecycle company. So we can kind of help out with the whole life of a device, from purchasing that device and getting it deployed and imaged, to the ongoing servicing and management of the device, all the way to the retirement of the device, where we could recycle it for you. We are partners with all the big manufacturers, so Intel, HP, Dell, Lenovo. We also have a pretty big presence in the IoT and digital signage space. And we have a services division, which I'm a part of, that can help out with actually setting up management tools, mostly in the Microsoft stack. And one other way that we can help with the device lifecycle management is our DICE tool. DICE is an in-house developed tool that we have that is at its core an asset management tool, but has many other features that can help with augmenting your existing device management and inventorying processes, such as device location tracking, real-time information collection from devices, system level remote control to devices, assistance with vPro management. So if you have any interest in DICE or any of the hardware offerings we have, services offerings, we'd love to hear from you. So with that out of the way, let's get into the meat of today's presentation. So we're going to be talking about the Microsoft Defender Security Suite. But when I say that, I mean we're going to be talking about a subset of the Defender Security Suite, as it would take hours to talk about everything. On this slide, I've kind of listed out the main components of the Defender Suite. But today we're going to be looking at just a couple. So Microsoft Defender in Windows is the first one we're going to look at, which is the one that most people are most familiar with. So Defender in Windows covers your built-in tools, Defender Antivirus, the Firewall, but then maybe some tools you're not as familiar with, like Application Control or Smart Screen. And we'll dive into those a little bit more in depth here. The other tool we're going to look at is part of Microsoft's Defender's XDR solution, XDR being extended detection and response. And specifically within that tool, we're going to look at Defender for Endpoint, which is Microsoft's tool for securing devices. There's also several other tools here. Again, we're not going to go into them today, but we can help with many of them. So again, if you're looking for help, maybe with one of these other Defender tools, again, feel free to reach out. So Defender for Endpoint, what is that? It's Microsoft's desktop security tool. It's like their EDR, endpoint detection and response tool. And there's kind of three main components to that. So prevention, detection, and response. Prevention includes many of the tools we're going to talk about today. So attack surface reduction, device control, network protection, etc. And we'll demo several of these. Detection kind of augments the built-in detection of the Microsoft Defender antivirus client, adding more advanced detection features on top of it. So we get a whole database of information that we can query and act on. We can discover unknown devices. We can set up custom indicators for dealing with specialized threats. And there's a whole vulnerability management dashboard that gives a great wealth of information. And we'll demo some of that here as well. And then finally, we have response. So the response part is the automated investigations, looking at security events that happen on your device and automatically taking actions based on those events. It also includes things like kicking off AV scans, maybe isolating a high security device from the network, or even doing a live response session into a device where we can connect in remotely to a device and do some immediate triage. So usually when I describe all of these features, people say that sounds great, but what about the licensing? So as ever with Microsoft, the licensing is a little bit convoluted. And with Defender for Endpoint, you have two plans. So Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 would be included with your standard A3 or E3 license. So many people will actually already own this licensing. And it provides a lot of useful features like the attack surface reduction rules, for instance. But Plan 1 does not include the full EDR features. It does not have the automated response or like the automated vulnerability management. For that, you need Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, which would be included with a A5 or E5 license. It can also be purchased as a standalone add-on to like an A3 or E3 license. Also, shout out to m365maps.com for the licensing graphics here. If you have questions on Microsoft licensing, I'd encourage you to go check out that website. Okay, then let's take a quick demo of Defender for Endpoint before we kind of dig into the individual tools. So what is Defender for Endpoint? Again, it's Microsoft's Defender security tool for endpoints, and that is all now accessed in Microsoft's, cloud security portal. So security.microsoft.com. So I've got a demo tenant set up here where I'm signed in and I'm at the dashboard. We see, all sorts of good information. The first question you might have is, how do you get devices into here? And it's actually pretty straightforward. So if you go down in Defender here to settings and endpoints, there's this onboarding and offboarding section. So under onboarding, you can select the type of device you want to onboard, and they've got many options. In this case, I would want to do 10 or 11. And then you can choose how do you want to onboard them. So using a script, group policy, configuration manager, Intune, lots of options here. You can then download that onboarding package and deploy it out via your preferred method. And actually, if you have Intune, it's even easier than this. So in the settings here, there's this Microsoft Intune connection. If you turn that on and then go over into Intune, and we go under tenant administration, connectors, and Defender for Endpoint, we can see that that connection is set up on the back end between Defender for Endpoint and Intune. And what that then allows us to do is under the endpoint security here, we can create an onboarding package And instead of having to download the onboarding file from Defender, we can just say automatically onboard using that connector. So then there's no packages to download or maintain, and we can then deploy this policy just out to all of our devices, and it makes it super easy. So once the devices have been onboarded, you'll see them show up in your console here under the devices list. So in this tenant, I've got 2 devices in here. I've got my demo client 1 and demo client 2. And then now in this environment, I have a Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 license, so I'm going to see mostly all of the features. If you have just a Plan 1 license, you'll see less tabs here. You'll still see some of the basic information, but again, to see all of this information, you will need a Plan 2 license. So you get an overview of the device when you click in here. You can see a list of all of the incidents that this device has been affected by, which this one's been affected by some ransomware that we should probably take a look at. Timeline, we get a big list of all of the events that are happening on this device, every executable, file system change, registry change, and this is all queryable, so great information here. Security recommendations, one of my favorite parts, which we'll go look at a little bit more in Secure Score, but you get a per device list of all the different security recommendations Microsoft has for a particular device. We also get an inventory of all the installed software and versions. We get a list of discovered vulnerabilities on the devices with their associated CVE identifiers. We would also see missing Windows updates. This device doesn't have any, but if it was behind on updates, we would see those here. And then we can even see a list of all the security policies that are applied, in this case from Intune. And beyond that basic information, we also have some actions we can take on the device. So we can tag devices to group them, and then set actions based on that information. We can kick off antivirus scans, collect an investigation package, which is like a bunch of log data. Restrict app execution. So if we get an alert on a device that, hey, suspicious activity is happening with maybe an app that somebody has downloaded, we could use this to restrict apps to only execute if they're like trusted Microsoft apps. We could isolate a device. So if there's a device that, say, gets alerted about ransomware, if you isolate it, it will totally kick that device off the network and only allow it to talk to Defender for Endpoint. And you can even do a live response session, which, let's see, have I turned that on? Yeah, I have. So with live response, it opens up a back-end command window to the device where you can then, query things, see like a list of all the processes that are running, try and do some triage remotely without, having to get into your normal remote tool or try and find that device, something along those lines. So that's kind of a look at the main device page. A few other things that are interesting to point out in here is hunting, which we'll get into a little bit more when we look at all of the other tools. But incidents and alerts, there we go. So incidents are kind of overall security events that happen. And then alerts are more specific security events that may be part of a greater incident. So in this case, I see a ransomware incident in here that I can click into. And we get a big map of a bunch of stuff that's happened with that ransomware event. So we see, several devices involved, processes, files, URLs, etc. And then we see a list of all the different alerts that are part of this incident. So I can click on alerts here, and then I could dig into these individual alerts to get more details about the specific actions. I can see all my impacted assets, so my devices, users, if there were mailboxes or other apps, they'd be listed here. All the evidence related to this incident, so all the files that were affected by the ransomware or related to the ransomware, all of the processes involved, all of the URLs that were involved. So excellent information for if you're trying to clean up after a security event. And then we have a little summary dashboard here we can even look at. So I could then use all this information to start going and taking action against this event. And then I'm also able to manage this incident. So I can, assign its severity. I can assign this to maybe a person or a group of people as, to take a look at or as their main task. I can tag it. I can, set different classifications. And when it's done, you could close it out as a resolved, no longer active threat. So that's kind of incidents and alerts, just a quick look at that. Let's see, the other thing I wanted to point out is secure score. So Defender will take a look at all of your devices and kind of give you a score based on how secure all your devices are. And then it'll give you this big list of actions that you can take to shore up the security on that device. So I really like this because a lot of times you wonder, well, what else could I be doing in my environment to help improve security? And this is a whole big to-do list that you could go through. And you don't necessarily have to implement all these either, because maybe some of them don't make sense for your environment. But if you click on a particular thing in here, so in this case, display or disable autoplay for all drives, it gives you some information about the recommendation. It shows you the devices that are vulnerable to it. And then we can look at some implementation information. So if we click on that, we can see remediation options. It tells us exactly how to create an Intune policy to remediate it, or how to set a registry key via some third party. Again, we get our list our exposed devices. But if we decide maybe this is something we don't want to actually do in our environment, we have this exceptions options down here. So I can say, I'm creating an exception for this recommendation because I am accepting this risk. Or maybe I've already mitigated this risk with another third-party product. So that's another way to clear these out if you're not going to implement them. Okay, and then a couple more things. So vulnerability management. Again, a very useful feature. This one's going to be, I believe, locked behind the Plan 2 licensing, though. But this is where you get all your detailed vulnerability information. So again, the recommendations, an inventory of all the vulnerabilities in your environment. So a lot of them are going to be like third-party apps. We can see, VLC or Adobe here that need to be updated, but other things within Windows as well. And then you'd get a big list of all the CVEs that apply to your environment. So just a bunch of really good information to act on in here. And then again, there's a ton of stuff in here we're not going to cover just because we don't have time. The last major thing I want to point out is reports. So there are several built-in reports here that you can look at. So just like a general, security report, all sorts of different reports. So make sure to check out those if you do get into the security portal. So then the last thing we're going to cover is the hunting, which we will get to in more detail in a minute here. So let's see, back to the presentation. So what I want to do now is go through some of the main components of Defender that are easy to configure that, you would have most access to pretty much all of these with just the Plan 1, standard Windows A3, E3 licensing. So the first one I want to talk about is antivirus. So antivirus is just the antivirus built into Windows, Windows Workstation, Windows servers. It utilizes what they call the Microsoft's next-gen protection. It does, behavior analysis, heuristics, cloud-based intelligence, a lot of the check marks that you're going to need on like a cybersecurity insurance audit. And then for each of these, I'm also going to include in the slide deck the list where you can configure all these settings in Intune, Configuration Manager, and Group Policy, just so you've got your options for setting things up. And again, we will be able to make the slide deck available afterwards, as well as a recording. So let's see, for antivirus, I'm going to show specifically configuring it through Intune. But again, this can be configured through Group Policy or Configuration Manager as well. So in Intune, there's this endpoint security node where pretty much all of our security stuff is going to live. And then we specifically want to look at antivirus. So makes it easy in here to just create an antivirus policy. I'm going to create a base Defender antivirus policy here. And then here we've got all of the different Defender settings. So we can go through and configure all of these. It nicely does tell you in here when you go to create the settings, which settings are the default settings. So if you're setting something different from what the default is. In general, you're going to want to set most of the defaults. What I do want to point out in here specifically that's of interest is This here, PUA protection. So that's potentially unwanted application protection. That can be turned on in an audit mode or just turned on, which means that those apps are blocked. So what is a potentially unwanted app? That's something like the Ask Jeeves toolbar, or the coupon toolbar, or the 10 best screensaver pack. Things that aren't necessarily malicious, but you probably don't want users installing anyways. So that's definitely one I'd recommend utilizing, either turning it on just in block mode straight away or turning it on in audit mode. So for what example, what that looks like here, I've got a couple of demo devices set up here. So on this device, let's see, I want to go download the file. There we go. I got my potentially unwanted exe. So on this device, I can run it, and I don't have the blocking turned on. So it actually opens up and is my potentially unwanted app. But I could then take this and copy it over to my other device here, where I have blocking for that turned on. And immediately, as soon as I copy it there, we can see Windows Security says potentially unwanted app found. If I try to run it, it says I'm not able to. And then we're able to actually query that information as well. So that's where this hunting node comes in back over in the Defender portal. So if I come back over here, hello, there we go. So this gives you access to basically all of the clients are sending are collecting all sorts of information all the time and sending that up to a big cloud database. And then this node lets us query from that database. So you can see here we've got the schema of all the different data that's being collected. And then we've got queries that we can write and save. So in this case, I've saved one here for antivirus. So antivirus detections, PUA. So show me all device events where the action type is an antivirus detection, and then the threat name starts with PUA. And then I can, set a time when I want to run that. Just last 7 days will work fine in this case. And I get a big list here of a bunch of information. So all the devices where potentially unwanted apps have been found, the folder they were run from, the file name. And then we can dig into that information. We can add additional columns. If you don't want to, edit it in this tiny little view here, you can export this list to Excel and work with it there. Which in this case, it's only 7 items. But if we're looking at a query that returns thousands of items, I would definitely recommend exporting to Excel. Okay, so that's Defender antivirus and the potentially unwanted applications. Let's go back to the slide deck here. Next thing I wanted to cover was the firewall. So the Windows firewall has been around forever. It's still included in any modern supported Windows workstation and server operating system, and it's kind of just does what it says. It protects all of your incoming and outgoing network traffic. Again, configurable from Intune, Configuration Manager, or Group Policy. And there's not a whole lot to show here. I mean, the firewall it's just a firewall. Go into the Security Center here. We've got the firewall. I would recommend having it turned on all your devices for all of the domain, private, and public networks. And then again, you can manually create exclusions on the device, though I would recommend using a policy instead. So the firewall policy in Intune, again, in endpoint security, and there's firewall. And then you can create policy in here. So we can create a base just Windows firewall policy, and we can also create a policy for firewall rules. So the firewall policy would just work to turn it on, configure the security features, logging, that type of thing. And then the firewall rules policy could be used to create firewall exceptions that you could then target at different groups of devices. So you can see all the information you'd want to set for an exception. There's also a useful little report in Intune here up at the top for all your devices that are running Windows 10 or later and have the firewall turned off. So there's nothing here because I only have a couple clients, but oftentimes I'll look at this in a client environment and there'll be quite a lot of devices in here. So a useful little built-in report. Okay, so let's start getting to some of the more interesting things here. So Smart Screen is another Microsoft tool that's been around for a while and has gotten, I think, more user friendly or more useful, I guess, over time. So Smart Screen protects devices against untrustworthy or unsafe web connections and files. It works in the Microsoft Edge web browser and the Windows File Explorer. And we can set it up in either a warning or block mode. And again, configurations in Intune group policy. This one actually isn't configurable by default in Configuration Manager. So let's see, what does Smart Screen look like? So if I go back to my demo devices and go into Edge here, I've got a bunch of links up at the top. So maybe if I try to go to a known phishing website, I get this page instead. It says this site's been reported as unsafe. If I click more information, it says you're blocked from continuing to this site. So I can't do anything here. If I go on my other client and try to go to the same website, I have a slightly different policy set up here where it gives me the same warning, but then under here, I do have the option to continue to the website anyways. So this is where it's set up in warning mode rather than block mode. And then the same thing exists for all the other websites. So there's, a known malware page, a bad download, right? So a download that Smart Screen would try to block. And then here I can say continue. And then even though I try to download it, you see in the downloads page, it shows up as it was blocked as unsafe by Microsoft Edge. But then I have the option here to keep the file anyways. So again, it's set up in warn mode, so I can ignore it and keep the file. And then in Windows itself, if you try to run a bad file, you get this pop-up where Smart Screen will say, hey, this is a known bad file. And again, this device is configured where I can run it anyways. But you could, again, set up in block mode where you don't have that run anyway option. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is it does even block stuff within a page. So in this example, like there's a bad ad or something on a page that Smart Screen blocks, but then it still shows the rest of the page. So it can block even just elements of a web page as well, which is pretty cool. So again, how do you configure Smart Screen? So that's over in the Intune portal once again. And this one is actually not in endpoint security. We're going to just go under our normal devices and configuration profiles. And yep, there we go. So I've got a couple of different Smart Screen policies set up, one in block mode, one in warning mode. Let's look at the block mode one. So we can see all the settings here. So Microsoft Edge, I've got just Defender turned on, or sorry, Smart Screen turned on. Same thing at the operating system level. We have Smart Screen turned on. But I don't have anything for adding exceptions in here. But that is something we can do. So if I go to add settings here, and then go down to the Smart Screen settings. So they've got a couple of options here. We can say configure the list of domains for which Defender won't trigger warnings. And we can also disable the warnings for apps if they're related to a specified domain. So both of these let us create exclusions for Smart Screen. So if we have, we turn this on organization-wide and we're getting false positives, this allows us to allow those false positives to bypass Smart Screen. So how do you get the list of exceptions to put in here? Because you don't really want to rely on your end users just calling the help desk and telling you. So that's once again where we can go back to the advanced hunting in the security portal. So I've got some queries in here related to Smart Screen. So maybe I want to see a summary of all of the URL warnings that have happened. So here I can see here's a list of all of the different websites that have triggered a Smart Screen warning. I get a count of how many times that's happened. So maybe I turn on Smart Screen for my organization and I'm seeing hundreds of Smart Screen entries for maybe an in-house developed web app that we have that I know is good. Well, now I can take this URL and go put it into the exceptions list in Intune. I can also see if I have Smart Screen turned on just in warn mode, but not in block mode. I can see who is overriding the warnings. So here I have a query that shows me, well, this device got warned about this website, and then this Jon Anderson guy just chose to ignore that warning and go there anyways. So it gives you a good way to kind of audit, if you do have it on in warning mode, who is maybe going to sites that they shouldn't be. So that's the main gist of Smart Screen. The last thing I wanted to mention is they do also have this enhanced phishing protection, which works in Windows 11, 22H2 or higher. And it does some extra protections around password security. So it monitors if a user tries to like copy and paste their password in plain text into like a Word document, or maybe out into a Twitter post or sorry, an X post. It'll pop up a notification on their screen and say, hey, this is a bad idea. Don't put your password in plain text in these places. Store it somewhere secure. Okay, so that's Smart Screen. Going back to the slide deck here. The next piece I want to talk about is network protection. So you may have noticed in Smart Screen, the kind of one of the potential drawbacks is it only works in Microsoft Edge. So network protection kind of expands upon that protection of Smart Screen by expanding it to kind of the whole operating system. So it would work for third-party browsers such as Google Chrome, and it would also add protection at like the base OS level. So if say like a PowerShell script tried to go access a untrustworthy website and download a file, network protection would kill that connection as well. And once again, that's all configurable through Intune here. Let me point out the policy quick first. So network protection isn't really its own standalone thing. It's actually part of the antivirus policy that we looked at earlier, the same place that you would go to configure the potentially unwanted apps. So just waiting for this to load. And then, yeah, if we go into one of our antivirus policies here and edit the settings, so in the settings list, we have enable network protection. So once again, this is able to be turned on in audit mode or block mode. And then as for what that looks like, let me go back to my demo client 1. So we know Smart Screen works in Edge, but now if I want to go to Chrome, let's see here, and then try to go to a bad website here, I get this pop-up down at the bottom right here. This content is blocked as malicious. So unfortunately, you don't get as nice of a warning page as you do in Edge with Smart Screen. You just get more of a general, I can't get there page, and then there's the Defender pop-up. So it's not as clear to the end user what's going on here, but it still provide extra security. So I would recommend taking a look at it at least, or at least turning it on in audit mode. And once again, if you turn it on in audit mode, we can go back over to the advanced hunting section here. And we've got network protection queries. So maybe I want to look at all of the URLs that have generated audit events in the last 7 days. So I get, here's my devices, here's the URL they tried to go to, what process were they running? Was it a PowerShell? Was it Chrome? Who was running it? Maybe I want to get that as just a list. I could run just like the audit summary. There we go. And then I get just my list of URLs and the count of how many times they've happened. I mean, I can also look up that same information for blocks. So if I do have it turned on at block mode. So again, the advanced hunting node, very useful for this kind of information. Okay, let's see. Back to the slides.
John, we had a question come through.
Yeah.
So it says, is there a way to limit the CPU usage Defender uses? When we onboarded our student devices, we saw the CPU go to 100% until we offboarded them.
Interesting. So that is a good question. And that's it kind of leads to a couple other things too. So there is a base Defender process on the device that runs just built into Windows. And then when you onboard the devices to Defender for Endpoint, there's an additional process that gets installed. So there'd be two different processes you'd be looking for. But within the Defender, or sorry, the antivirus policy in Intune or group policy or wherever, there's a couple of settings you can set related to that. So one of them is the average CPU load factor. So this is how much of the CPU do you want Defender to take? The default is 50%. So with this set at 50, Defender itself shouldn't be able to take more than 50%. The other thing you can do is set this setting, enable low CPU priority. So in this case, you're saying, let Defender take as much of the CPU as you want, but set Defender as a low priority process. So if anything else starts happening on the device, that process would take priority and the Defender process would fall to the background. Generally, if I've seen on devices where if you enable Defender and the CPU is going crazy, a lot of times there's a conflict with like another third-party security product. So I guess that's initially what I would say on that. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, back to the slides. Oh, not from beginning. Let's see. There we go. So attack surface reduction rules is the next thing I want to talk about. So this is a big set of rules. It's like 15 or 20 different rules that we can turn on devices. And again, all of them can be turned on in audit or block mode. But they do all sorts of things, from, blocking suspicious scripts from running, or blocking people from running, PS exec, running unsafe things from removable storage, and adding kind of advanced protection against ransomware. Once again, all configurable through Intune, configman, or group policy. And that is just out here in Intune under endpoint security, attack surface reduction. You can see I've got two policies set up here, one for audit and one for block. If we click into the policy, we can see a listing of all the different rules that there are. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but blocking obfuscated scripts, blocking Office apps from creating child processes, blocking credential stealing, unsigned processes, just all sorts of things. And then the nice thing is you can individually turn them on in block or audit mode, so it's not a all or nothing situation. And you can even create exceptions per rule. So let's see, what do these rules actually look like? Go over to demo 2. Get my ransomware file here. Take that over to demo 1. Let's see, I should be able to put it here. So I have my test file in my demo folder here, my txt file, and then I could run some ransomware, and my files have now been encrypted. And Windows is going to tell me about it. So now my test file has been encrypted. I can just run this. Fortunately, again, unlike real ransomware, I can just run the same exe again to unencrypt the stuff. Wouldn't be nice if that's how it worked, right? But if I take the same file now and go run it from, so the reason I didn't block it in the demo folder is because I have the demo folder specifically excluded from protection. But if I go put it on like the desktop and try to run it, I get a block. So you can't run this device. It's, it's no permissions. If I look at the action block notification here, it shows me that this this has been not something that Defender wants me to run on the device, basically. It should show here as, yeah, it takes a second for the new one to show up there. I still only see the one from 8.23, but it will show up in here as being blocked by the attack surface reduction advanced ransomware protection rule. So then we can see my test file is safe. So that advanced protection from ransomware, excellent one to have turned on. Another thing that we can try to do is run PS exec. So you see I've got PS exec on my desktop here, which can be used to do all sorts of not great things to your device. If I open up a command prompt, try to run psexec, instead of running, it just says system cannot start the file, and I get another Windows security notification here. So that's yet another attack surface reduction rule doing its job and blocking something that I don't want running. So again, I'm not going to go through and demo all the different attack surface reduction rules, but you can see they protect you from all sorts of different things. And then once again, there's reporting for it. So there is advanced hunting that we'll look at in a second, but for the attack surface reduction rules, there's actually a built-in report as well. So in the security portal here, you can go to reports and attack surface reduction rules. And it'll give you a nice little graph here of all the audit detections and block detections in your environment, and then kind of give you a summary down at the bottom of all of those detections. And there's some filtering here that you can do, but this is kind of a more basic, like high-level look at it. If you really want to dig into the details, that's where we want to go back to the advanced hunting node. And then again, I've got several queries I've built in here for attack surface reduction rules. So maybe we could, maybe we did something where we turned all these on in audit mode and let them run for a month. Then I could come in here and run a query and say, show me all the rules that have been running for a month and have no audit detections. So now here I've got a list of rules that have not generated any audit detections. So I would know that these rules are now safe to go turn on in block mode. But then maybe I want to see a list of all my audit detections. So these are the rules that have generated audit detection. So I know I need to go dig further into these rules and try to figure out, well, do I need to create some exceptions? So then I could go look at, say, all rule detections. And I get details of those detections, and I can see the path that whatever thing was running from, the initiating, who ran it, what device they were running it on, what the base process was. But I can look through those file paths and see, well, these are all called ransomware, so I probably don't want to create an exception for any of these. But if you are seeing a false positive in here, maybe for like the office child process blocked rule, well, then I could come back over here into my attack surface reduction rule policy, find the setting that blocks office child processes, and create an exception for whatever my valid application is. So yeah, that's attack surface reduction rules. If you're gonna set up any of the things that I talk about today in this presentation, attack surface reduction rules, I think is probably the most valuable one, or the one that I would start with. It's easy to set up, easy to put in audit mode. There's a built-in report for it, even if you don't have the Plan 2 licensing to do the detailed querying, and it provides a lot of extra protection. Okay, back to the slide. The next thing I want to talk about is controlled folder access. So this is kind of tied into attack surface reduction rules, but a little bit different. So what controlled folder access does is it allows only trusted applications to access protected system folders. So those protected or trusted folders by default are your user folders, users desktop, documents, pictures, that kind of thing. And then system files, so things like the Windows system directory, program files. But then also custom paths. You can add your own paths to be protected by controlled folder access. And what it'll do is it'll block an untrusted app from accessing one of those protected folders. So for instance, if somebody tries to run a piece of ransomware and it doesn't get blocked by, attack surface reduction rules or something else, controlled folder access would then block it because it would say, hey, this is some weird executable that's trying to modify the user's documents and encrypt all of them. I'm not going to let that happen. Again, these are all configurable in Tune Configuration Manager Group Policy. If we look, they're actually part of the attack surface reduction rule policy. So under endpoint security, attack surface reduction, if you click into the attack surface reduction policy, down at the very bottom here, there's settings for controlled folder access. So once again, it can be turned on in enabled or audit mode. You can add additional folders to be protected. You can allow exceptions through. And again, what that looks like, demo 1, I want to run different ransomware file. So this one is blocked. It looks the same as the block for the other one, but this is a different type of ransomware. So it actually is being blocked by controlled folder access rather than the attack surface reduction rules. So if we look at here, protected folder access. Yeah, there we go. So ransomware test file exe was blocked by controlled folder access. So controlled folder access and attack surface reduction rules are working together to block you from different types of ransomware. One covers things that maybe the other one doesn't catch. So useful to have both turned on. All right, so that's controlled folder access, pretty straightforward. I guess I can once again note that there is advanced hunting queries for it. So I've got controlled folder access here. Again, if I have it turned on in audit mode, I could see a summary of all of the audit data. I can see the only audited folder so far is my C demo folder. So I could decide, is that a folder I need to create an exclusion for? Maybe, maybe not. When I have it on in block mode, I can also see all the block details. So see what has been getting blocked. And here we see our ransomware test file has been getting blocked, which is good. All right, back to the presentation. I've got just a couple more left. So application control. This is another one that's just built into the operating system. A lot of people don't take advantage of it, but it is super powerful and can protect you very well, even if you don't have a lot of the other stuff set up. So what app control does is it restricts applications from executing unless they're trusted. So it doesn't matter where they're trying to execute from. It'll block it anywhere on the system if it's not a trusted app. And by default, trusted apps would be things that are like built-in Microsoft apps, things you install from the Microsoft Store, things that are signed by Microsoft with like their code signing cert. You can also set up managed installers. You can say automatically trust any app that's been deployed through Configuration Manager or Intune. You can trust things based on file hashes or attributes. So all sorts of different things to control what are trusted apps. And then the benefit of this is, say somebody downloads something to their downloads folder or desktop, or they copy something off of a flash drive. That's just some weird executable. When they try to run it, it'll get blocked by application control. And then I note down here at the bottom too, use the Defender app control wizard to configure policy. So the thing with application control is, actually I should show quick here too. It is configurable, again, for Intune, Configuration Manager, and Group Policy. But in Intune, the configuration is pretty basic out of the box. So if I go to create a policy, it wants me by default to enter XML data. There is built-in controls, but they don't really let you set a very detailed policy. They basically just say trust managed installed apps and good reputation apps, which is going to block all sorts of things that you actually need to run. So what I'd recommend doing is entering XML data. But how do you enter XML data? So there's this tool Microsoft has called the WDAC Wizard, which you can just download, just Google search it, it'll pop up right away. But it has a nice graphical policy creator for you. So you can start with a base policy, say something like, I want to allow just all Microsoft stuff, or I want to allow anything that's Microsoft and signed and reputable. And that gives you a base policy to work off of. And then you can then go further and tweak that policy. So maybe I want to allow everything from a managed installer. I probably don't want to do some of these other ones like store apps or anything, but and then down at the bottom here, we can turn it on in audit mode or block mode for the policy. And then we've got a big list of apps here. So we've got a bunch of the built-in stuff, but then I can add custom rules here. So I can have a rule that's either allowing or denying an app. I can do the rule based off all sorts of different things like file attributes or hashes or folder paths or publishers. I can do publisher to allow maybe all my in-house developed stuff, something like that. So if I do like path here, maybe I do a folder path and I want to say, allow anything to run as long as it's in C demo. And then create rule. And then now I've got a new rule in my policy to allow anything from C demo to run. And then I'm able to go through, and this will actually build the policy for me, save it to a file. And then now I've got that XML file I can look at that is all built for me, and I didn't have to fiddle with trying to set all this up myself. And I'd be able to take that XML file and just upload that right here to the setting in Intune. So I would definitely recommend deploying that one out in audit mode to start with, and then using the advanced hunting to query the results of that, because you're going to get a lot of information back here. So I built a policy for app control that was really only said only allow like Microsoft signed stuff. And on my 2 demo clients in a few days, it's generated like 2,300 entries here. So you probably want to start by having a more comprehensive audit policy and then deploy it out, and then use the advanced hunting to kind of trim down, find exceptions, update the policy, look at advanced hunting, update the policy, look at advanced hunting. Once you get it to the point where you're not really seeing false positives in here, then you could look at turning it on in a block mode. Okay, and then just the last few things to mention here. So there's also device control settings that we can look at, configurable through Intune or group policy. I don't have a lot of demo on these ones, but I did want to just point them out because they can be useful, though I don't see them used as much. If we go to attack surface reduction here and create a policy for device control. So device control policy has some high level things where we can just say like removable disk write access. So like I just deny write access to all removable drives. Or maybe I want to turn off Bluetooth completely on devices, or only allow certain Bluetooth connections. Or maybe I want to totally just turn off USB connections on a device altogether. Maybe I've got a public kiosk device where I just don't want anyone plugging any sort of USB into it. There's more default or more verbose Bluetooth settings here to configure that. And then up at the top here, there's all the device control stuff for specifying device IDs or instance IDs. So what you would use this for is creating a policy essentially to say block all USB access except from trusted hardware. So you would get the device IDs for maybe a specific model of USB drive that you want to hand out to your employees. And you would say allow that specific hardware identifier and block all other hardware identifiers. So now people are forced to use that specific model of USB that you're handing out to them. Again, this is pretty nice to configure in Intune because they give you a graphical interface. Doing it through your policy, it is unfortunately all XML files, and there's not really a nice builder for it that I'm aware of. So I would recommend doing it through Intune if possible. And then I just really wanted to quickly mention too, BitLocker is also in here. While not really Defender, it is a good idea to turn on BitLocker, and Intune does have easy controls in here for it. And then the last thing to mention is some PowerShell commandlets. So it can be hard to tell, like if you're at a device, exactly what features of Defender are turned on and how they're turned on. Just from looking at the security center, it doesn't give you that detailed of information. So there are these PowerShell commandlets that you can run on devices to get more detailed information about what's actually set. So for instance, I could go on my demo client here, which is still upset about all the ransomware running on it. And then go get-mp preference. And I give it a big list of all of the Defender settings that are configured, what state they're in. Here's like my attack surface reduction rules, which ones are turned on, what state those are in. So definitely recommend utilizing these PowerShell commandlets, especially when you're trying to like test out features on a device. And then speaking of testing, I also included a few links here, which you can get from the slide deck. But basically all the files you've seen me running, the controlled folder access, the ransomware test files, the smart screen test files, All of that stuff is just hosted by Microsoft on their Defender for Endpoint demonstration scenarios or on the Defender test ground. So you can download those and play with them in your own environment. If you want to get more in depth with exploit testing, there's also the Atomic Red team. If you look into that, they've got a whole list of all the different CSVs that exist that you can then test against your devices and see how Defender holds up to detecting them or remediating them. And that's the a very quick overview of a bunch of the Defender features that you're probably licensed for today and may or may not be fully utilizing. So yeah, I guess thanks everyone for coming. Again, this presentation, the slide deck will be available, and we'll be making the recording available as well.
And we did have 2 questions come through if you have a minute for them.
Yeah, I was going to say, feel free anyone to ask questions right now. I can hang out for a little bit. But if you don't get your question answered, just reach out to us directly, and we'd be happy to discuss, offline in more detail.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, the first one that came in was, are there any good resources for pre-built config XMLs to start from?
I think Microsoft has some in there. They have like a GitHub repository for several of these things. I know for sure for like device configuration, if you Google search that and look at the Microsoft docs, they have several example XMLs just in the Microsoft docs themselves. But then there's actually a link to a Microsoft GitHub repository that also has good example XMLs that you can start off of with like common kind of starting scenarios. So definitely, I would refer to the Microsoft documentation and Microsoft's GitHub for that.
Thank you. This next one is 3 parts. So it says, how long are incidents and alerts retained? Can the retention be changed? And are you able to download an incident to something like a PDF or Word file?
So the data retention in the Defender Security Portal, I know for sure for all of the hunting data, and I believe for the incident data, is 30 days with Plan 1, but I believe that goes all the way up to 6 months with Plan 2. And then as for downloading the information, I don't actually know. I've never tried to do that. Let's find out. Doesn't look like there's really anything right on the main page here. There is an export button on the overall list of incidents. So if you have your list of incidents here, you could export that list to a CSV file. I'm not sure through the GUI if there's a great way to do it from here. But the other thing I should mention too is there is backend for all of this stuff, Intune and security and everything through the Microsoft Graph API. So a lot of times if there's something that you can't obviously do in the GUI, there may be a way to do it using PowerShell and the Graph API.
All right, there's one more in here. And the last one says, have you enabled bidirectional communication between Defender and Sentinel?
I have not played around with that too much. Most of the work that I've done specific or personally with Sentinel and Defender has been just in a lab environment. So I can't speak on it personally too much. We do have some partners though that we work with that do more with Microsoft Sentinel. So if you want some more information on that, we would have to set up a separate discussion with them.
Great. It looks like that's all the questions. So thank you again, everyone. Like we've mentioned, the presentation will be sent out to everyone following the conclusion.
Thanks for coming, everyone.